right, I'd ask you this morning to open up your Bibles to the Gospel of John in the 14th chapter. If we're going to stem the tide and turn back the evil that we see it, we look around and we're looking at society and we're thinking, why has not the church power to turn this tide back? He says, I tell you what the church needs is fewer of the mere followers and more of the dedicated disciples. But to me, more than anything else, this race that we are running, it is a race after Christ. It is a race that depends upon him. It is a race to become more and more like him, to develop his character and his likeness in our life. And it's a race to eventually, we know that when we finally cross that finish line, we'll be in his presence. It's a race towards him.
What did you envision your life to look like when you were younger?
Well, it depends on how much younger I was. I mean, I can go back, and when I was a little kid, I wanted to be a tuna fisherman, but as I grew up, I did want to do other things. And I think about the time I was entering into my adolescence, what I really had a desire to do was to be a writer. And then that got more specific. I wanted to be a novelist. I didn't know what to do in life, and I had been kind of spinning my wheels. But it was my mother, to be point blank, my mom. And at first she kind of recommended I join the Marines, and well, the whole thing with the Marines didn't quite work out. But then later on, joining the Navy did. When I signed up, I was able to, with the recruiters, when I left the MEP station, my anticipation was that I was going to be part of the Naval Securities Group. I was going to be a crypto tech, which a cryptologic technician, that's a glorified term kind of for a spy. So I was going to have a top secret security clearance and work for naval intelligence. Particularly, I was going to be what they called an I-brancher at the time. I stood for interpretive, and it meant that I was supposed to be sent out to Monterey, California, and they were going to teach me how to speak Russian. And then being able to speak and read and hear Russian and all this stuff, I was to monitor Soviet air traffic. I joined in 1985, which is kind of like at the height of the Cold War, It was at the beginning of Ronald Reagan's second term. And so, yeah, that's what they needed. They needed people to kind of like keep tabs on Russia. At that time, it was still the USSR, the Soviet Union is what it was at that time. And so that was what I had intended to do. What actually happened, though, in the whole shift up of things, when I got down into boot camp, I don't know if there were billets all full in Monterey, but they switched on me. All of a sudden, they said, you're not going out to California. You're going down to Pensacola, Florida, and you're not going to be an I-brancher. You're going to be an R-brancher. And R, that stood for collective, Crypto Tech Collective, which these guys were the guys that copied Morse code. Okay, so it was a totally different thing. From learning to speak Russian to learning to copy Morse code. And it turned out to be kind of a fateful switch, because when I got down there, it was uncovered that I had a kind of a hearing deficiency, a problem, so that at the very highest speeds, when I was trying to copy the Morse code, especially like if there was any kind of background noise, I just couldn't really focus in and hear it clearly. And the end result of it was that I wound up not getting through A school successfully. And they sent me off to the fleet without a rating at all. And I went out there rather discouraged, as you can well imagine, thinking, oh, wow, this is great. There goes all of my goals of becoming, a crypto tech and not going to be a spy after all. What am I going to do? Well, I don't even know what I'm going to do at this point. I'm just going out to the fleet. I think that if they had sent me out to California and I was just to learn Russian language, I think, I could have handled that. But the problem was I wound up going down to Pensacola for, God only knows why. But I take it all these years later as part of his plan. One day down there in Pensacola, I was spiritually frustrated. I was frustrated in all kinds of ways. I knew that I wasn't doing very good as an R brancher. And I basically just said, I prayed a kind of a frustrated prayer, and I ended it by saying, Lord, I'm going to go into town. I'm just going to have a good time. I'm just, I need to get out of here. I just need to. And almost magically, I was going out the front door of the barracks where I was staying, and just about that time, a taxi cab glided up and stopped right there at the end of the sidewalk that I was walking down. So I just kept walking right down, went up to the window and said, I kind of want to go into town. He said, where do you want to go? I said, well, I don't know. Where do people go? I want to go get something to eat or something. And he suggested that what he called, I think he called it the French Quarter. I wound up going to a little restaurant. It was called Rosie O'Grady's, and it was in a little plaza with a couple other shops, restaurants, a bar, and some stuff in there. And so I went in there and I sat down. I got me a big old cheeseburger with some beer battered onion rings, and was drinking a beer and having my dinner and still thinking and trying to make sense of my life. And well, I got up from there, and instead of going back outside, I went down the way a little bit, and I went to a bar, and I started drinking more beer. I think I drank 3 or 4, maybe 5 or 6, I don't know. But I do know this, that by the time I left that place, I was kind of drunk. I was really feeling it, and I was going out there to look for a taxi or something where I could get a ride back to the base. But I stepped outside the building, and I heard preaching, street preaching. Loud voices, and it just went straight through me. Oh my goodness, there's preachers out here. And instantly I was alerted, and I was interested too. And I went across the street, and there was a young man over there that was passing out gospel tracts. His name was Chris Olson. The very next morning, he would actually bring me to the church that he was going to. It was Bible Baptist Church in Pensacola, Florida. And he asked me if I'd be willing to go. I said, yes, I'd be willing to go. I mean, I'd just been praying. I had been praying. Not just before I left to get into that taxi cab, but I'd been, over the course of days, I'd been praying. I'd been seeking. And all of a sudden, this was God doing something. I said, sure. Tell me when you need me to be there. And so I made an arrangement to meet him at the gate of the base. And he showed up. I got in the car. I was still hungover. I had a headache. But I was in my Navy dress whites, and I went to his church, and I just began to go to church with him regularly. As a matter of fact, I not only went to church with him on Sunday mornings, but he got me involved in a Bible study on Friday evenings. By that time, I was really pretty deeply entrenched in learning about the Bible. I mean, it was a new big thing. It was a big thing in my life. And I would sit, and I would just study the Bible, either myself, or I'd be reading a book or a commentary book about it, or I'd listen to all these tapes, and I was learning and I was growing. And my friends were getting drunk, and I was getting enlightened. I realized somewhere down the line that I needed to sell out to the gospel. When I got up to Iceland, things changed. I started going to an off-base church. It was called the First Baptist Church of Njarðvík. And it was, when I first got there, it was pastored by a missionary by the name of Rodney Colston. While I was there, Rodney's replacement came in. His name was Johnny G. Wright, and he actually became the first real pastor of this church that Rodney Colston had found. Johnny actually got me involved in preaching. He saw that I had been going out with some of my friends. I had friends on base, Steve Komnick, Ray Lemon, Daniel Dardla, Randy Makowitz, others, that we got together and we would go out and we would win souls. We had gospel tracts. We went and knocked on doors. And when Johnny saw that I was into that, he said, Brother Steve, I think the Lord has his hand on you. He said, I'd like you to speak at a watch night service, which was, this would have been December 31st, 1989. We were getting ready to bring in the 90s, And he said, I want you to do a message on soul winning. Since you seem to be really enthusiastic, you're zealous in it, you're doing it yourself, I think it would be good for you to preach on that theme. And I was scared, but I agreed to preach on soul winning. And that was the very first time I ever preached in my life. In the fall of that year, going to Midwestern Baptist College in Pontiac, Michigan. And that's where I began training in earnest. And all along there, my surrender to the ministry was progressive. It took steps. New things began to develop in my heart. And at a certain point in time, I understood that the wise man would be that man that set himself to discover God's will. And once he discovered it, nothing else mattered. Run in the direction of that will. Fulfill it as if it were the most important thing in the world, because for you, if it is what you know God wants you to do, you can't come up with a better plan. And you will be sorry if you choose any other plan but the one that he would give you. And I was seeking actively for God to reveal himself to me, like, Lord, what would you have me to do? That's the same thing that the Apostle Paul said when he got up off of Damascus Road. Lord, what will you have me to do? I was praying that. And I was praying it earnestly, increasingly so over the years. What I gave up was a fantasy created out of my own mind. What I got was an opportunity and a chance to go in the direction that God would take me. And I believed then, and I still believe today, that will always wind up in a superior final destiny. He gave me a wonderful wife. He's given me 9 wonderful children. These are things that I did not deserve nor ever could deserve. He's given me a chance to be in ministry. Not everybody gets that. He's given me gifts sufficient so that I can hold my own. I am a Christian, and to be a Christian, by definition, is to have not just a new seed of life in you from Jesus Christ, but a new reason for living that corresponds with the life he gave. The world cannot bestow upon me any honor higher than the honor that I get in serving Jesus Christ, my Lord.